Why are flags appearing in greater numbers on English streets? And why does the Prime Minister say that there is a danger they could be devalued and belittled? That's what we'll be discussing on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's James in Glasgow.
And it is Chris back at Westminster.
And we're joined by Matt Chorley, fresh from his interview with the Prime Minister. Hello, Matt.
Hi. I'm sadly not any longer in the cabinet room. They kicked me out.
No, well, I suppose that's reasonable because it was some hours ago. I suppose you could have tried to hide under the desk. Maybe you'd have got some amazing scoops.
Well, actually, it was worse than that. So basically what happened, I interviewed Keir Starmer in the cabinet room today, live on my 5 Live show. It was supposed to be in the garden. They thought it'd be a nice, relaxed chat in the garden. But as we were walking to Downing Street, the heavens opened. So then they moved us to the terracotta room, which is one of the reception rooms upstairs, and I was just frantically rewriting all of my facts about the garden to be facts about the terracotta room. And then they came and said, actually, we're going to move, we've got permission, you can do it in the cabinet room. So then went down to the cabinet room, which is obviously much more exciting. But in the minutes, as the clock ticked down to 2 o'clock and us going live from the cabinet room, I was basically just Googling facts about the cabinet room because I had sort of 5 minutes at the top of the programme while the Prime Minister was joining us.
I think it'd be a great shame if those facts about the terracotta room went to waste. Have you got a fact about the terracotta room to have?
Do you? Yes, I can. I can tell you it was, it's not always been terracotta. I think, this is all off the top of my head, I think it was blue in the 70s and 80s, and then Margaret Thatcher had it repainted green, and then it was during the noughties it became terracotta. And this is well, is it interesting? We'll find out. When Margaret Thatcher had quite a lot of work done, she there's lots of sort of plaster work and sort of twiddly bits all around the cornices and all of that. And in one of them above the door is a little man carrying some thatch, who's a roofer, a literal Thatcher, and that was put in as a little, nod to Margaret Thatcher.
That actually was more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Right, Matt, we'll talk about your actual interview shortly, which was also interesting, we should say. But before that, Chris, the Prime Minister, who's actually had quite a busy today, has been saying that phase 2 of my government starts today, and that includes a bit of a shake-up, not necessarily a huge shake-up, but something of a shake-up in government, particularly inside Number 10. What's been happening?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been a reshuffle, but not the kind of traditional one where you see people walking up Downing Street and becoming the Secretary of State for this or that and waving a red box and smiling and all that kind of stuff. Instead, it's been another reshuffle within 10 Downing Street. So we've seen it before. You remember about a year ago on Newscasters talking rather a lot about Sue Gray, the first Chief of Staff for Keir Starmer, and the volcanic rows there were about her, and then she didn't last very long and she was replaced, and we saw the original Director of Communications, Matthew Doyle, leaving in March, and a change there, and various other changes that we've seen at various points too. What we've seen today from the Prime Minister was about 9:30 this morning. I was still putting on my new shoes for the new term and setting off in, and all this was beginning to happen. Darren Jones, who was the Chancellor's deputy, was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He's going into 10 Downing Street to become still a Chief Secretary, but Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, which is the new title. And his appointment alongside a new economics advisor with an economics CV that is hefty, to put it mildly, and a new principal private secretary, civil servant, who is the kind of main gatekeeper to a Prime Minister, incidentally also from the Treasury, and various other changes here and there. A new executive director of communications, a guy called Tim Allen, who used to work in Downing Street a million years ago under Tony Blair. What they're trying to do is give Downing Street more oomph and more direction and more grip at the centre of government. The thing is, we've heard them make that argument before about previous changes, and now they're making more changes. Some people moving from one job to another, some people out the door and other people in. So I think it speaks to an acknowledgement from the Prime Minister, and he was reflecting on this in his conversation with Matt, that they need to get better at delivering, at actually doing stuff that people can see. Because, as the Prime Minister's acknowledged, there is a gap for many people between a single word slogan in a general election campaign, which was change, getting albeit on a small share of the vote for the scale of their victory, a colossal landslide victory. And then plenty of people, when you look at the opinion polls now, saying, well, what was that change? What is that change? Does it amount to much? Do I like it? And the opinion poll suggests a lot of people are not impressed.
Yeah, and newscasters are very well informed. So some newscasters may indeed know some of the names you're talking about there, but I would think it's fair to say that not everyone will know all of the names.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, Matt, if then, as Chris says, the point really here is not necessarily who exactly these people are, but the fact that the Prime Minister thought he needed to make these changes at all.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to, and we'll hear when we hear the interview with the Prime Minister, I sort of made the point to him that we were told before they came into government that this was going to be the most ready incoming government ever. They'd got Sue Gray, they'd got the team in place, they were going to hit the ground running. You know, the work of change begins now, or whatever it was he said outside number 10. And actually, now we're being told, oh, no, that team wasn't right, so we got a new one, and then that one wasn't right, so now we've got a new one. And so I said to him, well, doesn't that look a bit... Actually, the word I used was silly. If within 12 months you've had to have 3 reboots of your team. And there's an interest, you're completely right. People don't need to know about the individuals, but just know that, you know, if you worked in a business where everyone just below the top boss kept on changing within 12 months, you'd start to think, well, what's going on here? Do they not know what they want to do? And I think certainly speak to some Labour MPs, even some Labour ministers, privately, they will say that this goes actually to the heart of Keir Starmer and whether or not he really knows what it is he wants to do and how he wants to go about doing it. And you can keep changing all the people around the top boss, but eventually you have to ask, well, what is there a problem with his approach to doing the job? That's in no way suggesting that anyone serious I've spoken to talks about removing Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. He told me he's going to definitely lead them into the next election. But there's a sort of anyone in any organisation who's been through endless reboots and management restructures will know that if that happens 3 times in 12 months, you know that's not a sign of an organisation which is firing on all cylinders and knows exactly what it's all about.
No. And Chris, there's another senior figure in the government who I suppose, you know, you might just ask a question or two about, given one of the other shuffling of the chairs that's gone on. So this is the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Baroness Manoush Shafiq, coming in as the Prime Minister's economic advisor. Mm-hmm. But the question there is, what does that mean for the Chancellor? What does that mean for Rachel Reeves? Does that tell us anything that the number 10 isn't pleased, doesn't think she's delivering? Does it undermine her authority? Well, you know, why does the Prime Minister need this person? Surely he's got the Chancellor as effectively his senior economic advisor.
Yeah, I think, you know, the Chancellor wouldn't be a human being, I think, if that thought hadn't at least passed across her mind, whatever reassurances she might have had from Downing Street. Baroness Shafiq's economics CV, her CV as an economist, is extraordinary. You know, off the top of my head, not only has she been the lead civil servant in a government department, which is quite an achievement in itself. She's worked at the Bank of England in a senior role. She's worked at the International Monetary Fund. She's worked at the World Bank. And she was the director of the London School of Economics. I mean, any one of those things might point to a certain economic pedigree. All of them is extraordinary. And, you know, if we rewind the historical clock, you know, you can point to, going back more than a generation, to the Thatcher era, the tensions between an economics advisor in 10 Downing Street and a Chancellor were there then. Now, I'm not saying there will be necessarily right now, and Downing Street would argue, look, clearly the economy, its sluggishness, finding economic growth is absolutely central. And therefore, why would you not want as much economics firepower around a Prime Minister as you can get? But yeah, I mean, it's quite the sort of land grab, if you like, because not only has Rachel Reeves lost her deputy, who clearly the government highly regard because he's just got a job in 10 Downing Street, the new principal private secretary has come from the Treasury. Then there's Baroness Shafiq with that extraordinary economist's CV. So yeah, it's quite something. And any sort of thought within the Treasury that they have a monopoly on economic wisdom has been rather sort of taken on by this, these sequence of hirings.
Yeah, certainly interesting. Right, Matt, all of this takes us to your interview with the Prime Minister, and we're going to play that in a minute in full, just in a second. But, you know, my question is, you always have limited time, especially you have limited time by definition with any interview, but particularly with the Prime Minister. How do you decide what to ask?
Well, I had this exact conversation with Chris a couple of hours before I went into number 10. And actually, essentially what happens is over the weekend, so I had been speaking to number 10 for a while over the summer, just to sort of lift the curtain on a bit of this, and then hadn't really heard anything. And then I was on my way back from my holidays on Friday when I got a call saying, yes, we're on. You can come and do it from the garden in number 10 a Monday afternoon. So I sort of spent the weekend mulling over some of the areas that I might like to cover, the sort of, oh, that's a clever question. I woke up this morning without a brilliant idea, in my sleep as to a question I was going to ask and then immediately forgot it. So I'm really sort of mulling it over. And then I arrive in the BBC offices in Millbank and everyone I bump into suddenly has an idea. I could have been talking to Keir Starmer for 10 hours and still not have used up all the questions, I think. Yeah, so I had BBC colleagues in Millbank. I had 5 Live colleagues in Salford. As I was walking from Millbank to Downing Street to do the interview in the rain, I bumped into, I think, 3 different people who had various ideas of things. Ultimately, number 10 said, you can have 10 minutes. Now, normally, and Chris will know this, they tell you 10 minutes. You think, well, I'll try and push it to 12, maybe 15 if I can. And because it was live, they can't sort of leap in front of the cameras as they might do as a pre-recorded thing. But I was very aware that just out the sort of corner of my left eye, if I kept turning, I could sort of pretend they weren't there. But then they started WhatsApping me while mid-interview, and it was sort of popping up on my phone and on my my laptop that I was using for my questions. So in the end, I thought, I'm going to ask about the stuff that 5 Live listeners have been talking about all over the summer. That is a general sense of frustration with the government, which actually plays into the conversation we've just been having and the mini internal reshuffle. The issue of asylum hotels, and actually Keir Starmer appears to have committed news on that by suggesting he wants to bring forward the date to shut them. Flags. Like it or not, the country's been talking about flags. Are you putting them up? Is it patriotic? Is it racist? That was definitely an issue. He wanted to talk about childcare, so that went on the list. And then we sort of started hurtling towards running out of time. So I didn't get to talk about Donald Trump, which I wanted to, touch on Gaza that I wanted to. And there was an interesting article in The Guardian at the weekend after his Keir Starmer's team, Arsenal, lost, and they compared the style of Arsenal losing 1-0 to Liverpool to Starmer ball, sort of just very steady as you go, no attempt to sort of win anything, hope that the other side loses. And I wanted to know how he felt about that he's now being compared to a lacklustre performance by his football team. But we didn't get there. We got as much as we could.
And let's have a listen to it right now.
Keir Starmer, welcome to 5 Live.
Thank you very much for having me on my annual appearance.
It is almost exactly a year to the day we last spoke. Just tell me what it was like the first time, because I was just telling our listeners about the history in this room. What's it like the first time you walk in here as Prime Minister?
Quite incredible. And for your listeners, just to describe, there's a long, almost oval table with an assigned chair for every member of the Cabinet. The Prime Minister's chair is the one here to my left. It's always in the middle, as you'd expect. And I think my first appreciation was just to think of all the decisions that have been made in this room. This has been used for decades. So in the First World War, the Second World War, all those prime ministers and their teams sitting in this room to make huge decisions about the future of our country. So I felt a real sense of history, but also of privilege to be able to come in and sit in the Prime Minister's chair in the Cabinet room. It's quite an incredible room.
Let's talk about some of the decisions then that you've made. It's just over a year ago since you made a speech outside in the garden where we were going to be until the heavens
Until the rain decided otherwise.
And you told voters then that things were going to get worse before they get better. They look at what's happened since then, whether it's number of small boat crossings, strikes in the NHS, the state of the economy. They still feel like things are getting worse. We've had so many messages this afternoon of it, sort of expressing a frustration. People want to know when things are going to get better.
Yeah, I get that frustration because after 14 years of the last government, people voted for change and they want change. The reason I said a year or so ago that it'll take time is because I wanted to level with the public that after 14 years worth of failure, public services, the economy, you name it, it was going to take time to turn it around. And that is frustrating because people want change as quickly as possible. I completely get that, and I want it as quickly as possible. I think here, a year on in, what I would say is we spent the first year sort of fixing the foundations, if you like, doing the hard yards, but we now enter into sort of phase 2 of the government, which is where we focus on delivery, and start to show what a difference a Labour government really makes. And so, yes, it was always going to take time. The urgency and the frustration I completely understand. I want to go further and faster. And that's amongst the reasons I've done some changes here at Number 10 today to make Number 10 more powerful to drive through the changes that we need.
I was going to ask you about that, because before the election, we were told repeatedly that Labour was going to be the most ready incoming government in history. You've now reshuffled your team 3 times in a year. It starts to look a bit silly, doesn't it?
Well, I'd take you back a step. When I took over as leader of the Labour Party, I said there would be sort of 3 phases to this. You've got to sort of build the fundamentals first, and then you move on to the second stage. So this should be seen more as moving on to the second phase than a reshuffle, because some of the positions are actually new positions. The Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister
is it a reflection of
has
your
never been
frustration
there
that
before.
actually you haven't brought about the change that you promised?
Look, I do want to go further and faster, and yes, I'm frustrated about that.
Angry?
No, not angry. I'm frustrated. I get the frustration and anger of voters because they want change. I mean, for a very long time, most people feel that their living standards haven't gone up, their public services aren't what they deserve, and they're not really getting back what they are putting in. So I want to deliver that change as quickly as possible. Today is about moving on to that second phase. As I say, delivery is the absolutely key word, and that's why I'm really pleased with the changes today, and actually bringing in a senior politician alongside me here at Number 10 to focus on that delivery should be seen as a sign of my determination.
Darren Jones, yeah. Here, as your chief secretary to the Prime Minister. There's lots I want to ask you about, so let's move on to some of the specifics. You promised to smash the gangs. So far, the only thing you've smashed is the record for the number of people coming in small boats. How are you going to win back the trust of voters who at the moment think that Nigel Farage and Reform UK have been making all the running on this?
Yeah, let me first acknowledge it's a really serious issue. We have to have control of our borders, and I completely get it. And I'm determined that whether it's people crossing in the first place, whether it's people in asylum hotels, or whether it's returning people, we absolutely have to deal with this. When it comes to the asylum hotels, I want them emptied. I've been really clear about that. I completely understand why people are so concerned about it. The only way to empty them is an orderly, systematic working through of the cases as quickly as possible, and then returning those people who should not be here. I'm really pleased that in the first year of the Labour government, we've returned 35,000 people who shouldn't be here. But again, I want to go further and faster, and let me be absolutely clear through you. I want to see every single asylum hotel closed. The way to do that is in an orderly way that actually gets the cases done. And here's the big divide.
The trouble is, Prime Minister,
just hear me out, because you put to me, Nigel Farage. The difference here is between an orderly, sensible way of actually fixing a problem we inherited from the Tories, or fanciful arrangements that are just not going to work. I mean, Nigel Farage and Reform are just the politics of grievance. They feed on grievance. They don't want the problem solved because they've got no reason to exist if the problems are solved. And so the contrast in politics is a Labour government rebuilding, renewing the country in the way that we said we would, or this politics of grievance that simply puts forward unworkable, fanciful ideas that are actually not fair to the public to put forward yet again ideas that just aren't going to work.
But let me take you to one of these towns where there is an asylum hotel. How would you feel if it was a hotel at the end of your road? If your daughter was having to walk past one of these hotels every day, how would that make you feel?
I completely get it. I mean, local people, by and large, do not want these hotels in their towns, in their place. And nor do I. I'm completely at one with them on that. I'm not in any way underestimating the strength of feeling that there is, because people strongly feel that these claims should be processed. People shouldn't be held at their expense.
They don't want that hotel at the end of the road. They're trying to live their lives. Their children. They're worried if their children are safe.
Well, look, I understand why people want the hotels closed. I want them closed. And I will work across the board to close them as quickly as possible. That is my aspiration. Every one of those hotels closed down as quickly as possible. Well, the way to do that is to work through the backlog.
But can you put a date on it?
Well, we've said we'll get rid of them all by the end of the Parliament.
That's a long way. That's 4 years away.
I'd like to bring that forward. I think it's a good challenge. I want to bring that forward. And part of the change in the phasing of government is to say what we need to do needs to go further and faster and be brought forward. But do I understand why people are concerned about asylum hotels? Absolutely, I do. Do I share their feeling that they should be closed as soon as possible? Yes, I do. But we've got to have a sensible way of actually doing that, and not a fanciful proposition. And it's all very easy for Nigel Farage to put out fanciful propositions that aren't going to work. It's actually not fair to the public to keep pretending that these answers are there. And, these are people who just talk down our country. They want the problems to persist. Nigel Farage doesn't want these problems to go away because once the problem's gone, he's got no grievance. He's got nothing for his politics to attach to.
Well, he would obviously say he does want this problem solved, and he said he's got plans. Let me move on to some others, because I'm conscious we've got a limited amount of time. Over the summer, one of the things we've seen an awful lot of is people putting up flags, St George's flags, Union Jacks. It sparked such a debate on 5 Live. Some people say it's patriotic, some people say it's racist. Which is it?
I'm a supporter of flags.
You are sitting with one, you've got a Union Jack behind you.
I've got one behind me. Are
you a supporter of people painting roundabouts and hanging them from lampposts?
Look, I'm the leader of the Labour Party who put the Union Jack on our Labour Party membership cards. I always sit in front of a Union Jack. I've been doing it for years, and it attracted a lot of comment when I started doing it. And in our flat, which is upstairs from here, as you know, we've got the St George's flag in our flat.
So you're encouraging people to put up more flags?
I'm very encouraging of flags. I think they're patriotic, and I think they're a great symbol of our nation. I don't think they should be devalued and belittled, and I think sometimes when they're used purely for divisive purposes, it actually devalues the flag. I don't want to see that. I'm proud of our flag. I sit in front of our flag, and I'm very, very proud to do so.
Let me ask about some other topics. Making a big announcement today on childcare, £9 billion, big expansion of childcare support, 30 hours free childcare for those parents who are eligible. But there's a big problem, isn't there? People saying the big long waiting list. It's one thing you have in the pledge. Lots of parents saying it's hard to get the places.
Well, look, let's firstly say how important this is. This is 30 hours of free childcare. That's from age 9 months through to reception year. This is fantastically important for parents and carers who can go and get on with whatever they want to get on with. For many of them, that may well be going back into work, improving their own economy and the national economy. For children, it's hugely important. A child that's been in childcare, by the time they get to reception year, is likely to be far ahead of children who haven't had that opportunity. And you hear these stories that are real about the disparity in 4-year-olds, some arriving in nappies, some quite articulate. That is a life-changing difference at the age of 4. This is going to help close that gap. True it is, we've got to make sure, as we are doing, we've got the right staff in the right place. I was really pleased, and I just double-checked this before coming on here, that 9 out of 10 parents have got the nursery of choice for their childcare. So the system is working. And this, I think, for all of your listeners who've got children, this is a real game changer in terms of what it does for the parent and the carer, but also what it does for the child. And I want to make sure every child can go as far as their talent takes them. That means starting at age 4 with the best possible chance, and this gives them that chance. I'm really proud of what we're announcing today. I think this is the difference that a Labour government makes.
Let me ask you about, you've talked about you changing your team. One person you haven't changed is Angela Rayner, your deputy and housing secretary. Lots of stories about her, questions over her housing and her tax arrangements. Some close to her saying, look, this is sexist, classist, misogynistic. Is she the victim of a briefing war, or has she got questions to answer?
Look, Angela is Deputy Prime Minister of this country. That's an incredible achievement. And Angela came from very humble background, battled all sorts of challenges along the way, and there she is proudly, and I'm proud of her, as our Deputy Prime Minister. And one of the things that drives me in politics is aspiration, is opportunity for people to go as far as their talent will take them. I'm really pleased that Angela's
Is she the victim of a briefing war?
Well, look, Angela has had people briefing against her and talking her down over and over again. It's a big mistake, by the way. Andrew's an incredible Prime Minister, an incredible person.
Deputy Prime Minister. You just said Prime Minister.
A Deputy Prime Minister. But and what a great story of British success, that we are a country where Andrew Rayner can be our Deputy Prime Minister. I'm proud of that. I think we should be proud as a country that Andrew Rayner is our Deputy Prime Minister. And that, by the way, will give, I don't know how many working class children, particularly girls, a real sense of aspiration. They will look at Andrew and think, and I can do something like that. What a brilliant thing.
Before I let you go, it's your birthday tomorrow. We always seem to speak around your birthday. What does Keir Starmer want for his birthday?
Well, mainly for people not to really acknowledge it, because there comes to a stage where you don't want to. But our daughter is 14. She's going around the flat saying, "Are you excited? It's the eve of your birthday." She's already celebrating. I'm trying to play it low-key, but I don't think our kids will let us get away with that.
Without being rude, come the next election, you're going to be a few weeks away from your state pension.
You are trying to be rude, aren't you?
Are you definitely going to lead Labour into the next election to do a full term?
I'm definitely going to lead them into the next election. I've always said this is a decade of national renewal. I'm really proud and privileged to lead this country as Prime Minister. I intend to do that into the next election. And that project of renewal is absolutely integral to the next phase of this government and then on into the next election and beyond that.
Keir Starmer, really appreciate your time today. Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thank you.
Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, joining me live in his cabinet room.
So that was the Prime Minister talking to Matt Chorley on 5 Live. What stood out for you, Chris?
So I think that line that Matt mentioned just as we began listening to the interview about migration hotels is interesting, because there he was not only repeating the long-standing promise to close them all by the next general election, but wanting to do it sooner. Now, he didn't put a time frame on what sooner might mean, but he didn't necessarily have to say that. So I think that is interesting and was newsworthy. I thought it was intriguing that he talked about having a St George's flag in his flat. Because he's always talked in the past about how the flat in Downing Street is very much a private and family space as opposed to in any sense a workplace. But I thought it was interesting that he volunteered that. Now, whether that's a flag that was flying because of the football a while back, or is it because of England rugby? I don't know. I was just intrigued by that, particularly, the St George's flag as opposed to the Union.
I have to say, I was kicking myself after that. It's one of those things where in the split second, there was an obvious follow-up of, where is this flag? When we were on the radio, Chris, you were speculating, was it his bedspread? Is it a towel? And of all the things I wish I'd leapt on and said, what do you mean you've got a flag? Why have you got a flag in your flat? Where is it? What is it? What's it doing? Is it a tea towel? How big is it?
Fridge magnet. Yeah.
But on the subject, wherever it is, he was very careful, Chris, wasn't he, with his words, the Prime Minister, around the flags that have been appearing around England in terms of the St George's Cross and the Union flag. It was quite interesting. Just at the weekend there, I was driving through a part of Glasgow and there was a saltire on every single lamppost for a good couple of miles. And I'd come from an anti-immigration protest at which people had been flying not just the Union flag, which you might expect from that particularly British crowd, quite a unionist crowd, but also the saltire. And there's something going on here as well. But to the English question, first of all, the Prime Minister was quite careful, wasn't he? Although he did say that they could be devalued and belittled if used for divisive means, which is very interesting.
Yeah, so he clearly thought through how he was going to take on that line of questioning, because he wanted to embrace the flag. I mean, as Matt said in the interview, he had to, because he had one behind him. And also, Labour had been doing that. That was a big part of the visual element of the rebrand of Labour when Keir Starmer took over from Jeremy Corbyn. So he wanted to be proud of the flags, and then also, if you like, proud in this collection of nations that is the UK, that you can have overlapping loyalty to flags, whether that might be the saltire or the Union flag, and of course some might not have an affinity towards the Union flag but have one to the saltire, or indeed the St George's flag and the Union flag, etc. etc. And he wanted to acknowledge that is entirely not only perfectly reasonable but something he himself actively embraces, not least with that line about the St George's flag in the flat. But at the same time, whilst not wanting to, if you like, fan the flames of some of the spikier elements of the argument around flags, and as some might see it, the case for placing flags in lots of the places they've been springing up in recent weeks, acknowledge the argument that others would be making, listening to Newscast or listening to Five Live, of, hang on a minute, are at least some of those flags that have been appearing on motorway bridges, etc., in the last few weeks, being done so by those who have a divisive intent. I think it was broadly the language that he was using there. So I think that was him attempting to, or at least setting out to, neatly acknowledge both sides of the argument and, if you like, reclaim that association with the flag, because it's fascinating, isn't it? You know, the median sentiment of a average, even using the word average Brit is a ludicrous one in the context of flags, obviously, but where is the median sentiment of a person in the UK about flags? And is it, and I just float this as a thought, is it one of a low-key pride, but perhaps more often than not a reluctance to wave it garishly, unless perhaps Scotland are in the World Cup or England are in the Euros, or, you know, there's a particular reason? And so hearing that conversation that we've had about flags in the UK over the summer, I think is often through that prism of a median instinct to have a low-key pride, rather than, as you see in some countries, not least the United States, a far more overt willingness to kind of just have them everywhere all the time, really, to a greater or lesser extent.
I think it's definitely complicated by the nature of this country. And of the different flags, meaning different things to different people at different times. I think you're broadly there, Chris, talking about the Englishman or woman's median position with regards to the St George's flag or the Union flag. And then when you get into other parts of the UK, of course, that becomes, as you acknowledge, it becomes much more complicated, doesn't it? I mean, there's definitely way more of a crossover between the Union flag and the St George's Cross than there has traditionally been between the Saltire and the Union flag, for example, or at least in the last quarter of a century or so.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's I'm really intrigued by what's happening here as to whether some people on the right are trying to reclaim the Saltire for the Union and to say this is our flag as well. Gordon Brown, after he was Prime Minister, made a speech along those lines about reclaiming some of Scotland and its national identity on the eve of Scotland voting in the independence referendum. So, I mean, there's so much complexity here. But Matt, just out of interest, what are Five Live listeners saying? I mean, you said this was coming up a lot with your listeners.
Yeah, this has been coming up a lot. And over the past couple of weeks, you know, the phone-ins on Five Live, the messages, and what's great is while I was sitting in the cabinet room talking to the Prime Minister, I could see on my screen, if I toggled between tabs, my list of questions, but also the text coming in, and and I can see that the whole time when I'm on air, as can all Five Live presenters, and then listeners come on and they take part in phone-ins, and that was why I wanted to ask him this question, because I think sometimes it's one of those things where the country has been talking about something, and of course, and this list has got in touch to point out a whole long list of other things which they think are more important than flags. But as a topic which the country has been talking about, Five Live listeners, I think, split right down the lines that Chris was just talking about. It's why I wanted to ask him the question. You know, is putting up all these flags, is it patriotic or is it racist? Because actually, you get both arguments being put all the time to Five Live listeners. So that's why I wanted to ask, because I think it's interesting what the Prime Minister had to say. I found that he was more, this is a strange sentence, he was more pro-flag than I was expecting. I thought he could have batted it away and not waded into it, which I thought was interesting. And actually, while Chris was talking about, comparing flying the flag in the UK to maybe in the US, you reminded me of, I do a feature on my Five Live show every week called 2 PM Qs, when I take a guest 2 PM Qs, and then at 2 PM we talk about it. And a few weeks ago, I took Matt Goss from Bros. And over lunch, we had this really interesting conversation. He used to live in the US. He had a residency in Vegas, and now he's come back to the UK. And then we ended up having this conversation on air as well. And he was saying he found it strange, having been in the US, where everyone flies the flag. It's just everywhere. It's not just on sort of town centre flagpoles. It's in people's gardens. It's hanging off the back of a truck. It's tattoos. It's everywhere. And then having come back to the UK and suddenly finding everyone's a bit weird about the flag. And even at that point, it struck up quite an interesting response from listeners, that it is clearly something that sometimes people feel a bit awkward about talking about. And clearly some people are awkward, nervous about talking about it, because it is the case that in some areas, people are using the flag, putting them up to say, this is a symbol of, we do not want these hotels here, these asylum seekers here.
Well,
but then it's opened up a much broader conversation.
Exactly. And to that exact point, the anti-asylum hotels protest that I was at in Falkirk in central Scotland on Saturday, there was a mix of people there, all sorts of different. Some people were local, some people had come in, some people were supporters of the far right provocateur Tommy Robinson. There were other people who were saying they were simply concerned about local housing and amenities and so on. One person at one point made a speech saying, "Keep Britain white, keep Scotland white," at the end of the speech, which was very, very striking. And there were a lot of flags flying at that protest. As I say, there was the Union flag and the Saltire, and indeed the other Scottish flag, the Lion Rampant. And there's been more, Chris, discussion about these hotels today, hasn't there? The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has been telling the Commons on the subject of well, if not the subject of hotels themselves, but on the subjects of bringing family members here, that she's suspending all applications from people who are here to bring family members to the UK under the asylum system. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Exactly that. So the rules as set out up until now allowed refugees to apply to bring immediate family, which was defined as a partner, either a married or unmarried partner, and children under 18. The argument that Yvette Cooper made is that there are other European countries that at least have a delay before that is possible, of perhaps a couple of years. And she announced today that she is suspending the right of refugees to be able to request that for now, whilst they work out what they do in the medium and long term. And there's statistics that point to a recent uptick in the number of family members who have come, and that then contributes obviously to the overall numbers, but can also make housing a particular issue. And she talked about the stress that it can place on local authorities in terms of the potential for homelessness.
And do you think this is a signal, Chris, that this is going to dominate politics more widely in the coming weeks?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And there's two reasons for that, try and be as pithy as I can. One is that this issue just matters. It is salient. It resonates with so many people. I was looking at a poll from the middle of last week that put immigration and asylum as the most important issue to more people than any other issue at the moment. So there's that point. And then there's secondly, I think, a point where even if your own baggage of concerns about what the government or the country is up to doesn't put this issue particularly high up, it's just a very transparent example of government failure. It was for the last government and it is for this one. Because if you're attempting, whatever your own view about this particular issue, if you are attempting to say, or you are saying, we're going to stop people crossing the channel on small boats because either you're going to, as Rishi Sunak said, stop the boats, and he didn't, or you're going to smash the gangs and, well, either you're not or they're still coming anyway, then it's a transparent example of failure. And when you have a party as adept at communication as Reform are, able to point to that day in, day out, as they were doing over the summer, then that is a big issue. So yeah, absolutely, we're going to see that, and the government trying to make a case that iterative solutions like this idea around families, like looking at the whole business of the European Convention on Human Rights, like looking at a returns agreement with France and sending people back, etc., can that over time add up to something which they can credibly point to is making a difference? Answer yes, and maybe the salience eases off. Answer no, and well, it doesn't, and a lot of the politics of what we see at the moment I think will continue or potentially step up.
Yeah, really interesting. Much more of that to come. Chris, for now, thanks very much.
Ta.
And Matt, thank you. Very interesting to hear your interview.
Good to speak to you.
Cheers. Thank you both.